Welcome back to BizMafia, where business gets made. We are thrilled to introduce today's guest, a true trailblazer and powerhouse in the world of solar energy. A co-founder of SolarLeadFactory, Scott's a pioneer in solar energy space. He and his co-founder built SolarLeadFactory from the ground up and sold that company to Enphase Energy in 2022. We are pleased to welcome Scott Mueller to the program. Scott, welcome.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Scott. Thanks for coming on, buddy.
Yeah.
Scott, I was doing some research on your background, and it's pretty extensive, really interesting background, a lot of fascinating experiences. I mean, see that you speak multiple languages, you've traveled quite a bit. But one thing stuck out to me that I mentioned to Pat earlier, and I said, it's very rare that someone gets into an industry right after college and sticks with it. And that seems to have been the case with solar, that you got involved at a very early age. In fact, right after or right around college. Can you give us some history and background there?
Sure. It's kind of a funny thing for sure to get into solar. I mean, probably lucked out with where the industry went. It was not perfectly premeditated, let's say that. But I got involved, I mean, even back to high school, even when I was a kid, I drew like probably more of an environmentalist than a business person. To be honest, I drew a little diagram when I was a kid of like a machine that would kind of suck pollution out of the air. Obviously now like carbon capture technology actually exists, but this is when I was a little kid. I drew this. In high school, I was like part of our environmental chair. And then I was in California Student Sustainability Coalition when I was an undergraduate at UC Davis. And I studied economics. I wanted to do an economics thesis on the viability of solar projects. And my economics professor said, like, that's not interesting enough. There's not enough data on it. I did a project on air pollution trading market. So it was like a NOx and SOx, nitrogen and sulfur oxide trading market in LA and doing analysis like that. So I started out more on the environmental side and then got interested in green building. For a while, I thought I wanted to be an architect. My dad's an architect. My grandfather's an architect. My uncle's an architect. I was like, oh, maybe I'll be an architect, do green building. So I got into that. And I thought that's where I was going to go, more in the direction of architecture. The other kind of thread that came together was ever since high school, I went to a pretty prestigious high school, and pretty fortunate thing in retrospect, went to this high school, and a lot of these kids were incredibly intelligent, and there was a lot of kids in high school who wanted to be like consultants for McKinsey and whatever. So I had this also thought process like, oh, I want to be this international business person. So those are the two kind of pieces that ultimately came together, and one would take the lead and then the other would take the lead kind of in my personal life. So I ended up studying economics, getting a degree in economics. I was going to minor in or double major in political science, ended up dropping that when I kind of got more passionate about the environmental stuff. And so that's the genesis of getting, kind of setting up the stage, I guess, to enter solar. But that wasn't, even at that point, it wasn't clear that it was going to be solar. And I kind of ended up in solar both by mistake and kind of by passion. So I know we'll edit this part out, but I'm just going to like figure out what the best way to land back into this. So yeah, so I had these pieces: economics, international kind of studies, the environmental part, and I was thinking, okay, how do these things come together? So in 2004, 2005, or my junior year, I spent abroad in Spain. So I spent my junior year abroad in Spain, got really interested in that. I came back senior year. My college career was pretty funny. First year, I was always academic, but first year I played on the rugby team. That was a serious experience. Then I joined a fraternity, which was a lightweight experience compared to being in a fraternity. Then I went to Spain.
Yeah.
And the first 3-4 months in Spain, I got all the rest of my partying out pretty well. Those people know how to throw down. And then kind of the second half of my year in Spain was a little more introspective, maybe a little more maturing. I came back, got really involved with this Student Sustainability Coalition at UC Davis. And so those were the 4 chapters of my 4 years at UC Davis. And as part of that, I was really into green building. I helped start the U.S. Green Building Council's Emerging Green Builders chapter in Sacramento. when I was fifth year senior. I was doing that, working on this thesis, and then it launched into a job at the California Department of General Services. So that was all intended to be green building. At the same time, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor, and that was the beginning of the Million Solar Roofs initiative in California, which was really like the genesis of the modern California solar market, was in that 2004, 2005 period. It had predated it, but that was the first time that there was a major, like Jerry Brown in the 70s, 80s had done something, but that was the first time it was like, all right, modern business, we're going with solar, and Arnold's a character.
So I have to jump in here real quick because you have a great story, an imitation, I should say, of your interactions. Can you give us the quick and dirty on that?
Yeah. So the way I heard it was Arnold had all these advisors, right, that were kind of thinking about which policy should they promote. He had developed this green team, which I became a part of. There was an interagency program, and everyone was kind of jockeying for what we should do. And Arnold, like in the middle of some meeting, just kind of like, no, I want the million solar roofs now, just kind of like, and everyone was like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing. And it turns out like sometime a couple, 2-3 years ago, California did cross over that million solar roofs milestone, but it was pretty funny. And that was okay, that got my eyes open to solar. Then I went to Germany. They were doing amazing stuff with solar. They still are, but I mean, amazing stuff, like light years ahead of where the US was. Building integrated, it was going up on all these roofs. Just the scale was 10 times what it was in the US at that point. And I was lucky enough to go over there, saw that, came back, applied to a fellowship, Fulbright actually, applied to a Fulbright to go to Germany and study this. Simultaneously was like thinking about working for the UC Office of the President, doing a bunch of like random stuff after college, but really wanted to be in this space. Got denied the Fulbright fellowship, ended up like having a kind of major, crazy personal life change, and kind of one of those moments where you wake up and go like, shit, life is fragile, life is delicate, like life is not permanent, do what you want to do. And I was like, I'm not going to work in a cubicle anymore. I'm going up on a roof and get a job doing that, and I'm going to keep kind of trying to get to Europe. So I did that. I was both installing solar panels, like it's kind of a blue collar job very much, but we were like all college grads and stuff like that doing construction because we cared about solar. And so then I was like hooked on solar, and I said, hey, I'm just going to devote everything to solar at this point and kind of go for it, and reconfigured an application, applied for and got accepted to this group called the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, which is like a really cool project. 10, it still exists, 10 Americans, 10 Russians, and 10 Chinese. And they were all working on independent projects in Germany, whatever they thought was interesting about Germany. And the idea was to create this kind of cross-country pollination and amongst all those countries. So that was wild. Spent like 3 months with all 30 of us in these dormitories learning German, and then we kind of went off in our worlds. And that was, I don't know, that was a pretty formative experience as well.
I mean, there's a lot of puzzle pieces that had to come together, right? With your passion for the international space, exposure to solar, the fact you got your hands dirty to really understand it, I'm sure benefited your career and your path. And then ultimately seeing Germany as kind of the launching point to, hey, this is working in California, but hey, this is more global. And Germany's being far more aggressive than what I've seen. You learned a lot. Did you then at some point, because you said you were traveling back and forth to Germany, help me see, did you spend a fair amount of time out there? Help me see this a little bit clear.
Sure. Yeah. So the transition then, at that point, I'm kind of idealistic. I'm like 20 something, I thought policy was going to be the way forward, right? So I was kind of thinking policy, economics, but then just being in that world, I was like, this is moving too damn slow, and watching the business take off. So halfway through my experience in Germany, kind of cloistered in these halls of academia and like policy and just, writing papers that nobody's ever going to read kind of a thing. I kind of shifted gears, started work with a consulting company in Berlin that was consulting the German government and all these businesses on kind of, Germany at that point was a leader, and they were trying to export their technology, export their know-how. So I got kind of looped into that grouping of people, of entrepreneurs, businesses, and I became kind of like a spokesperson, hilariously, for the German Chamber of Commerce. and traveled like I was going back and forth to the US maybe 10 times a year, something like that. I would just fly in, give these talks with all these entrepreneurs about they were trying to bring their businesses to the country, to the US. And I would talk about kind of the market evolution in Germany. So I was going to Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Austin, I don't know, made all the major U.S. cities, San Francisco a couple of times, Singapore. I got to like give a talk about Germany's like expansion into solar in Singapore right before the Singaporean like Secretary of Commerce or whatever gave her a talk. Yeah. It was awesome. I was 24, 26 maybe, flying business class, like talking about this and just, this kind of combination of, I think later, like I've heard this explained, and I think I did this kind of by accident. Naval Ravikant has talked about this, AngelList founder and fantastic podcast series that I think everybody should listen to called I Will Teach You to Be Rich, but it's more of a philosophical rant than anything. I think it's just kind of a catchy title. Fantastic. 1.5 to 2 hour long tweet storm with his explanation. He became the founder of AngelList and did a lot of amazing things. Anyways, he talks about, a lot of people have talked about this, just having two skills that you're pretty good at, like sets you up for a very unique set of kind of experiences or opportunities, right? So I spoke German, I was international, but I was also American, had worked so I was 26, but I was early on in this industry, having these two kind of unique things that overlapped, and all of a sudden that opened up the world of possibility. And from there, I was consulting with and working with CEOs of companies that wanted to open up offices in the US as this kind of 26-year-old kid. It was pretty fun.
I mean, think about it. You just expedited the experience, the business acumen, understanding the political landscape, all of that. And I'm thinking back to when I was about that age, I wasn't even close, So it's like you had a leg up, I imagine, right? And you were able to, at some point, take that background and understanding and push and apply it to what became a very successful business, probably at an earlier stage than if you just kind of stayed in the States and maybe worked for the state of California or any other entity or body there. So that's got to play a significant role in you kind of launching this thing earlier rather than later, right?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I think it did kind of, looking back on it, it feels pretty accidental. Like, I don't think I was pursuing this. Yeah, I had ambition, I had drive from like before that, but I think a lot of people do. And, and it's not like, it was fun at the time, I was rock climbing a lot. It's not like I was purely focused on this. I was still 26. Sure. I was rock climbing a lot, traveling to all the different countries, goofing off a whole hell of a lot, kind of, just having still a kid and having fun. But again, just being in that kind of Venn diagram of, whoa, you understand the German market, the California market, you're fluent in kind of both cultures and, have like nuts and bolts experience and political experience and all these other things, was kind of this unique concoction that gave me a seat at a table that, probably is hard to get to at 26. But I think it was purely from following like interests at that point, and kind of like accidental, it wasn't premeditated.
That's interesting. You weren't chasing dollars. You weren't saying, I'm going to get into this industry because it's so lucrative. You just, again, followed your passion, which ultimately, if you do it the right way, will eventually lead to everything else, right? That people tend to desire. It's pretty impressive.
I think so. It was funny. I was just going to say, it definitely was not lucrative. The other day I found a stack of my tax returns from like when we started the business, because we launched the business in 2014, Clayton launched the business in 2012, and we can talk about meeting him there. But I was looking back at the tax returns, and I regularly, just kind of pinch myself. I'm like, God damn, this was not lucrative to start, to say the least.
So that brings us to a pretty cool subject. So you're this passionate guy, you're a really smart guy, very cultured, all these great experiences. I'm just thinking about what a loser I am, right? Thanks a lot for
makes two of us, Pat,
bringing that out in me.
Just a podcast. I'm just trying to sound it.
No, but seriously, so you have this kind of policy background, these great experiences. You weren't doing it for the money.
Right.
How does it give us the sort of the genesis of how this turns into SolarLeadFactory, how you meet Clayton Cornell, your co-founder, how you build that business, and where does it go from there?
Well, just to be Okay, so just to be clear on the money part, like there was a part of me that always wanted to make money, that was
Sure.
something in
Sure.
there, but I just, for whatever reason, I was just not prioritizing it at that time. And, I think, and I was prioritizing other things, which I guess in retrospect it worked out, I guess I should say. I don't know that it was the best strategy. Don't follow my example unless you
I
want to
mean, I
follow
could
mine.
argue otherwise, right? So,
So, okay, I came back meeting Clayton. I came back, I was tasked with another guy, Elliot Gansner, to come back and start the US arm of this German startup called PV Exchange, which was like an equipment trading platform. He was 28, had an MBA. He was more like, I'm more like the mafia side, or like I'm from the West Coast, so it's probably more like gangsta, like business
yeah.
gangsta, but like biz mafia. And he's more like, he went to like high class MBA and all that kind of thing. And so anyways, we land in the US. We're like, what are we doing? We're starting an office in San Francisco. Where are we starting the office? All right, we found a way to sublease space from this company one block off the grid in South Park, which is like a neighborhood of San Francisco. It was like it was originally a Joe Boxer factory. Then it was the first Twitter offices. And it's like this funky like warehouse thing. And we got like 1,000 square feet or less in the rafters of this like wooden barrel vaulted warehouse building. And one block off the grid was Clayton was working at one block off the grid, which was a aggregator of homeowners. They were trying to aggregate homeowners to put together like bulk deals. So kind of like what was that? What was the company? The company that you could like everybody could buy we can cut this part out and I'll redo this part. But the company that would like you'd go and like 100 people would sign up and then everybody would get a discount. You know what I'm talking about? What was that company called?
Not Groupon or
Groupon.
No.
It was like,
Yeah,
okay, so
there you go. All right.
Yeah, so click back up
yeah, it's
and
not the .coms anymore. Yeah, so
Right.
Clayton was one block off the grid, head of marketing, and had been like born out of this accelerator group called Vergence that was this conglomeration of all of these startups, early stage startups that like basically angel funded, and then they raised some capital and they were like, okay, which of the business models is going to survive? And the one that was going to survive was one block off the grid, which was trying to be the Groupon of solar. So they'd go out and they'd find 100 homeowners and say like, hey, if you guys all agree to buy solar, we'll go negotiate the best deal with the installer. And so Clayton was running that business, or he was running marketing at one block off the grid. And we just actually also accidental and following passions and like not premeditated. He would roll in on Friday morning with his surfboard or his kiteboard or something like that, having been maybe surfing at Ocean Beach in the morning or something. And I was rolling in with my skis, gonna go up like skiing in Tahoe for the weekend or something. And we just kind of looked at each other and go like, all right, we're not the same, we're cut from the same cloth, and like, let's hang out. And we just became buddies. And that's kind of how it started, and then also international chapter. He then left one block off the grid, was a digital nomad in like Thailand and all over the world, Indonesia, surfing. And it's like, hey, maybe we should start something that's more, marketing for solar. And I was looking at the industry from the perspective of a distributor, saying like, this isn't really changing the pace of adoption, right? Like we're just selling nuts and bolts and panels, and it's a good, it needs to happen, but it didn't feel like I was leaving my mark in it. It just felt like we were along for a ride there. And you got to understand one thing about the solar industry. It is tumultuous. Like it is up and down. People call it, I mean, any nascent industries probably has this, right? So it's just like the solar coaster. Things are good. The market dynamic changes. All the business model has to get rewritten. Like that's just was the nature of the game at that time in 2011, 12, 13. It was just always changing. And so we met there. He left in 2011, I think. Kind of started playing around with some of the early pieces of SolarLeadFactory in 2012. We re-met in Chiang Mai, Thailand in 2014. I was still working kind of more on the distribution side of things, but almost more like freelance, kind of taking a gap year, trying to figure out what was next. We started just working on this project a little bit more in 2014 out there in Chiang Mai. And we're like, hey, there's some legs to this. If we can kind of get some of the pieces right, there's some real legs to this. And then we could be our own bosses and keep traveling and goofing around forever.
Right.
So that was 2014. We then met in Mallorca, an island in the Mediterranean in Spain, and we were rock climbing out there. And we sat down, hashed out like the rough kind of like parameters for really giving it a go. And I pulled out of the distribution business that I had been working with and on. And at that point, I was working for a great startup, Civic Solar. I got some, pieces of wisdom that I picked up there from the founder, multi-time exit founder, and just got to work closely with those guys and pick up some of the pieces. And then we were off to the races. But that's 2014, and by off to the races, it's like tortoise and the hare kind of a race that we were in, and we were the tortoise. So.
That's interesting. So you're traveling quite a bit together. You're staying in touch.
Yeah.
You're in Mallorca. You'll launch this thing. Is there any hesitation at first? Because you're going from being a W-2, right? Kind of steady, solid paycheck at that point, or was this during the time off that you had to kind of reassess?
I had gone to 1099 with that.
Okay.
So the company PV Exchange kind of, anyways, just floundered majorly. Like they got $5 million in funding. Clayton's company got $5 million in funding, this one block off the grid about at the same time. And PV Exchange tried to expand internationally from like Germany to a bunch of other European markets to the US. Their business model worked really well in a supply constrained world. And then all of a sudden, within 6 months, module prices went from $3 a watt, which is like $3 a pound, basically $3 a watt, to $1 a watt, went way over supply. So like the business model kind of went over the handlebars. We were kind of swashbuckling and creating something different in the US, but it was clear that that wasn't going to work. So they pulled out of the US. I went and joined a company called Civic Solar, which was founded by this guy, Karim Baran, Michael Paler, Michael Goldberg. And these three guys, Karim had a background of building and exiting companies before. And so it was pretty interesting to work with him. And also at the PV Exchange, I got to work really closely with the founders of that company. And so there was just this seed like, hey, I don't really want to be an employee. So I'm probably like more arrogant. I mean, now I'm a little less arrogant, but at 20 something, I was pretty arrogant. So I'm like, I want to be 1099. I want to be straight commission. I'm going to bring in the business. I don't want you telling me how to do it.
By the way, which is really unique. Not many people have
Yeah.
that perspective or drive. It's quite the opposite, right? In most cases.
Yes, I think that mindset, Scott, was probably helpful in terms of your entrepreneurial path, that you weren't sitting there focused on all of the risk and stability. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think the other thing on that, definitely like my relationship to risk is pretty interesting. Like I think the things that I typically do for fun, now I have 2 kids, so the risk profile has changed. But the things I was doing for fun at the time were rock climbing and like outdoor, I wasn't doing anything super crazy, but outdoor sport climbing, lead climbing, which is like probably more risky commuting, but it's still like in the moment feels very risky being 20 feet up above the, your last connection point to the rock, and backcountry skiing. And, I was fortunate to like make friends with these backcountry ski and mountain guides in Germany. And we were skiing, pretty much every weekend in the winter. I was skiing somewhere in Switzerland or Austria or France, sometimes with harnesses on and, crampons, AVI beacons. Now backcountry skiing is becoming more mainstream, and it's an amazing sport. But at the time, I'm doing things like that. I never really thought of them as risky. I think also with the business, I never really thought of it as risky, because I always looked at it and go like, all right, this is about risk management. Actually, it's about controlling and minimizing the risk that you're taking and taking like asymmetric bets, right? I think people talk a lot about that with entrepreneurialism. Is like, you take asymmetric bets. You're definitely playing craps, right? You're always playing some degree of like gambling with it, because the future is super uncertain. But people say things like, you're not going to get something that you don't have by doing the things you've always done. So you got to do things that are uncomfortable to get things that are outside the normal like distribution of outcomes. Like you can't get an outsized outcome by playing in normal distribution. Probabilities.
That's an excellent point. I jot down the risk management point. So you're already doing that, in your personal life and your professional. And so now you're at a point where you guys launch the business. At that start, what do you
Yeah.
start with? Do you start with the tech stack? Do you start with a customer base? Like, where do you start to get this thing really rolling and off the ground?
Okay. So Clayton is like tech stack, marketing, that kind of stuff, right? We have like, at that point, we have very few customers. I come in and my background's more like in sales and business development. Obviously, I have this background in like other things too, right? And in terms of like trying to get businesses off the ground and business development, but I have kind of more of a Rolodex, more proclivity of getting out in front of people and selling. And so at that point, we say, okay, wow, what if we can target these installers and start signing up all these installers? And so we do that and we build up the business. We start bringing on lots and lots of customers. We land relationships with, the biggest installers at that time. And, that was just nothing but, it's hard to say if it's ignorance or confidence at that age, but you're like, look, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to get in front of these people. I'm gonna call them 5 times a day. I'm gonna go in through the phone tree and just like look up on LinkedIn or whatever. I'm gonna go through the phone tree and I'm gonna use the last name dialer to like,
you got to be a good detective, right?
Cold calling this one company kind of thing. And we hit some gold there, but it wasn't like an overnight success. We started in 2014 and literally it was flat. The business was flat until like we had some ups and we had ups and downs. We tried things, but when you look back at it, the business between 2014 and 2018 is flat.
And as it's flat, do you stay the course, or are you looking to kind of reinvent yourselves or change something within the organization?
So we're trying lots of things, right? We're experimenting. We're trying different business models. We're balancing kind of this lifestyle element with the trying to get it right. And I wrote this down, and I think that's the idealistic stage where you're like, hey, I'm going to, I think the mantra, the kind of Bible at that point is Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week. So you're like, hey, can we hack some way to like make at some point I like had a piece of paper. I've always had goals. So I think that's a good thing to think about in this stage. I've always had goals. And at one point I wrote down a goal, like make 100K a year and be able to live anywhere in the world. That was like early stage money goal, right? Which this is 2014, maybe 100K was still a lot of money then. Things have like changed a little bit about what 100K looks like now, but that was like an early goal, and I was like, if I can just make 100K and live anywhere in the world, like that seems like a pretty good goal, right? A little ignorant maybe too in terms of like building a business, not lofty enough of a goal. So
it's a couple
things. It's a start. Yeah. I mean, it's a start, but you're, and it's a good goal if you can get all those pieces, right? But something big changes in 2016 for me. I come back to the US after like being abroad for like this like year and a half pretty much, and meet my future wife back in the Bay Area, where I didn't exactly plan on staying. And the Bay Area has never been a cheap place to live. So all of a sudden, 100K anywhere you want to live starts to be like a little bit of an oh shit kind of a goal. Like this is maybe not where you want to set your sights now,
Just to interject here, awesome stuff. We have around 27 minutes to pack in a bunch of different
okay. Oh, we're done at 10:30?
Well, we have, well, I mean, we'll go a little over that, but generally speaking. So here, I want to shift, Scott, and I want you to say this. Where you're kind of going as life got more, the financial stakes got higher, and you had said something on one of those other podcasts about dogged determination.
Yeah.
Right. So Billy and editors, I want you to, Scott, get into how that shifted into the dogged determination and how that transition occurred. All right, back on.
Yeah. So it's like 2017. Go ahead.
Yeah. So your lifestyle and just the nature, I think, of getting a little older, more expenses. It seems like the direction you're going here is the stakes get ratchet a little bit higher. Is that fair to say in terms of what you needed to get out of the business?
Yeah. And I think it really kicks into overdrive when I have my first kid in 2017, February of 2017. All of a sudden, it's like we're in an apartment. Maybe it's like 700 square feet, or I don't know, small. It's like a junior 1-bedroom. My wife, this kid, we're like in an attic in this house in Berkeley. And I'm like, oh shit. Like Clayton's meanwhile, like still like bachelor, like living probably abroad, something like that. I'm like, oh shit, this isn't cute anymore. like it's not cute to be like, oh, I'm gonna like have this kind of like freestyle life thing. So I'm like, all right, double down. At that point, it's like, hey, we've gotta make this thing work, and things have to get scaled up. Life has to get better. My wife's like making more money than I am, which is fine as a general premise, but like I'm not making enough money to like support our family the way that I want to. And at that point, things kick into overdrive. And, I was reading like a couple books were really good at that point. Jen Sincero, You're a Badass at Making Money, and Grant Cardone, 10X. I don't know that I would still read those books and get the same out of them, but at the moment, that's exactly what I needed, was this kind of like, all right, dude, forget the like hack and find a way through and this and that. It's just time to go like all out. So I don't have it on me right now, but I still have in my wallet a check that I wrote to myself at that point that was a very specific, memorable amount of money. And to give the punchline away, we exceeded that with the exit that we got. But that was like 2018. And this is something like Jim Carrey had done apparently, and some other people. And you just go like, all right, now we're getting into like the grit, the dogged determination, like, last 1,000 feet of the climb in a mountain climb where you're like, let's just go home, but instead you're putting on crampons and an ice axe and going up, and you're like, why? It's that muscle right there that we kick into. And it's from there, we crack open a new business model. And like 2018 is the inflection point. And the business goes from 600K a year in 2017 to 25 million a year in 2021.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So it seems like from what I know, Scott, you guys were exceptional at identifying sort of the marketing engine that everybody's trying to build now. You saw that early and were an innovator. Take us through that, because you guys were 10, 15, well, probably 10 years ahead of everybody else, it seems like, in kind of seeing the need for digital marketing. You're innovators. So
yeah, well, I think that comes from, again, like out of the one block off the grid. So we were, and just seeing the opportunity. There's a few moments that really crystallize the opportunity on the table. Right. And I sat down to dinner. We landed this customer, and I went to a conference in Vegas and sat down to dinner with him. And he's like, Scott, we're spending $1 million a month on marketing. Right. And at that point, I was like, what? And he's like, and you get a blank check. If you can deliver results like this consistently, you write your own future. And I was just like, all right. So we had been kind of like we had been like just hammering on, conversion rate optimization, optimizing these marketing funnels, like knowing that you could convert people, home eyeballs, into opportunities, sales opportunities, right? And that was Clayton's kind of special sauce, coming from this background of marketing at one block off the grid. But we had been doing placements of widgets, kind of like a Taboola, but solar specific, placements of widgets advertising for solar on solar content. And then we figured out, and we like created some relationships. We figured out how to crack open paid marketing. And that was another thing of dogged determination. But there you start getting some wings, right? It's like, okay, it's not just believing in yourself. It's like, now you got wings. So at this point, I'm literally writing to myself 3-month contracts with 3 bullets on. And I just say like, you're going to do this, this, and this. And I pin it on my wall and just write a contract to myself. It was like, you're going to increase sales and, revenue to this point so that you can pay yourself this much. And we had like, at this point, we're getting a little more sophisticated. We're reading like EOS traction and scaling up and books on how to actually build a business, right? And so we've got this formula for how much we can pay ourselves, because it's all bootstrapped, right? So I'm literally going from $45,000 a year to like writing 3-month contracts to myself, how I'm going to increase my pay, right? And so we're taking this like learning, how can we build this market? We're adding on revenue streams to it every 3 months and just like hammering. And at that point, really just takes off. So
Scott, there's a lot of things you guys are adjusting to on the fly. It always helps when you have a life event to kind of expedite that growth and your focus. I mean, to go from 600,000 to eventually 25 million, there's some areas you naturally have to double down on.
In 4 years, right?
Right. What were those areas that you started to see success, whether again, back to the paid marketing and everything else, or conversations with clients that led you to the next idea? Where did you start to double down to really see that growth expedite?
Yeah, fantastic question. So I think we had been unclear to a certain extent on just the extent of the opportunity. And I think also just there's some of that and there's some market timing. So you have, and we talked a little bit about the solar coaster. So you have 2016, 2017, a bunch of companies that had been making a run up at the market kind of crest and start falling and falling apart. So there's this moment of reconsolidation in the industry, right? And then from that kind of things falling apart becomes this opportunity. Now, all of a sudden, there's new companies in the space. All those new companies are looking to grow. Simultaneously, we had this business model before, which was, again, this widget placement on media sources talking about solar. That part was very hard to scale. So we're trying to scale both the supply, if you will, and the demand. We're trying to add customers, and then we're trying to add more supply of leads or more supply of what we're selling to those customers. And so we're basically trying to scale two things, right? Both the demand side and the supply side. And we just couldn't get the supply to catch up to it, right? We'd sit down to these dinners and people would be like, I spend $1 million a month. We're probably sending them $15,000 or something, right? Going, what? What are we even doing here? Like, why can't, what are we going to do to tap into that massive opportunity? So we said, okay, we figured out, took all the learnings that we had from before. We had tried buying and reselling or aggregating leads, like a model that many people do. We weren't enamored with that. It wasn't giving good results. And we just started testing and working on this paid channel. The beauty of paid media is that you can invest $1 and out comes $1.25. And it becomes kind of a flywheel. So Clayton's background, really strong on more like systems, analytic, marketing, technology stack, all that kind of stuff. We have at this point, we've brought on a developer in Europe. He's been with us since 2014. So we've been kind of building this tech stack the whole time and trying all these different ways to land on it. So we've actually got this kind of battle-tested tech stack, but we just haven't had enough of the supply or like the stuff to sell to really scale the business. So all those years of just flat were really about, building the machinery, testing different things. Now we have this deep understanding of how our machine works, what it's capable of, and we just needed an opportunity. And that shows up in 2018 when the customers are like, hey, we'll spend a lot more money with you guys. You understand our business, you understand what we want. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say other than we just really at that point focused. We focused so hard. We weren't trying to serve everybody anymore. We said, like, we know something that wins here, put our blinders on. We're going to go find more customers like that, and we're going to go for it. I mean, obviously, this is also timed with macro events that at the time we weren't thinking about, but in retrospect, makes sense. Interest rates are like coming down. It's the second wave of the solar industry. So there's all these companies that are like running up and growing. And so all of a sudden, checks get bigger, the checkbooks get thicker, and all that kind of stuff.
So, Scott, one of the things that I keep hearing that I want to touch on a little bit is your partnership with Clayton must have been and is rock solid, because partnerships are hard. And what the audience may not know, you can touch on, you did this with a very lean staff, which is what makes this particularly incredible. But with what you're doing in your skill sets, talk a little bit about that. You have different skill sets. They say the best partnerships are complementary in that way. But what were some of the trials and what really made it tick?
Yeah, I think complementary, but also some base alignment that works, right? So like maybe tension. Complementary could be like it fits together, but there's also a tension in that. And then there's some sort of alignment, right? So I think, Clayton's very measured, very steady, very analytical, INTJ to the Mac kind of a thing, right? And I'm more, hey, let's go out, create partnerships, relationships, etc. Right? So like all of a sudden I've got somebody like holding down the back end, understanding how all the pieces fit together, helping to build the machine. And we obviously like cross-pollinate on some of those things too. And I think there's a great give and take. But look, to say it was all roses is not true. Like there were definitely some F-bombs directed mostly from me to him, because I'm more attacking by nature, more aggressive, and he just silently retreats, right? And then at some point you get into like maybe a sunk cost fallacy a little bit, or maybe just the belief that like, you see these things on LinkedIn that are like showing the like, just keep digging, right? And it's like a little like guy digging through and the gold is just at the end and like one person stopped before the other. Like the thing that Clayton and I definitely aligned on is that kind of grindy, what you call in mountain sports, like type 2 fun, right? So we just applied type 2 fun to the business, and we're just, neither one of us were willing to die. Neither one of us were willing to give up. And
do you think having that sports background helped that partnership? Because it's initially how you first bonded, but it seems like it's kind of the foundational tool of like that grit, that grind, taking your lumps, keep going. That play a role?
I think so. I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely get like a little, kind of chill in my spine thinking about it. Cause like when we were in Mallorca, like, I mean, we just like the two of us would head out to the rock every day and climb, and Clayton's the guy being like, okay, we got to wear our helmet before we like step up to the rock. And then like, I'm the guy who's like, all right, fine, fuck, I'll put the helmet on, but you know what I mean? And so like, there was some amount of like that sport, any of these sports like don't work as an individual, right? But they are kind of small sports. And then like both of us were soccer players growing up. So I think that similar language of like, hey, teamwork, is really important. But again, like it wasn't all roses. I mean, I think
Sure, but the other thing too is that I there's a lot of trust there in the sense that you didn't have to sit and worry about every single element, algorithms and finance or whatever the case was. You knew you had a partner who was on it. And then conversely, he has this guy in you who's out doing what you want to do, which is making relationships, which is pretty awesome, right? And it's kind of like the old 1 + 1 = 3 in the right partnership, which you guys had from that vantage point.
Yeah. And Clayton brought like a super discipline on like the frugality of the business, which was critical, like in all that. Right. And so, yeah, like that generative tension that was there, I think was really important. And yeah, I think neither one of us would have been able to do it on our own.
So 2018 was a big year.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned to me offline that you actually looked at maybe selling the organization for a first time. Can you elaborate a little bit on what happened there?
Yeah. I think that was like a point it was like right before we found the lock of the business that like led us to grow it. I think we were both just looking at it being like, man, let's just get a base knock here, a bunt. Like let's just go our separate ways and try something else. So that's a moment of like being like, maybe we should just back away. So we kind of tried to do it ourselves. It's laughable after having gone through a much more professional and organized process later. But we, whatever, that's what we were doing at the time. And we got 2 letters of intent. We got it. We accepted one. We went into like some form of due diligence, and ultimately the deal didn't come through. And we put together a partnership, like literally in the car, leaving the offices from the meeting where it was like, okay, this deal is probably not going to like advance, right? And we just literally on the way home, we're hammering out the deal that like with a partner to like build up some of our media stuff, and like one of the first relationships that we built in scaling the business. And so, wow, huge learning from 2018, 2022 when we finally did exit. So at that point forward, it becomes in our mind like, hey, let's build this thing up and see if we can't aim for an exit.
So what were the kind of the strategic elements that went into that, if there were any? A lot of times business owners don't do a ton of preparation, but by doing preparation, you can really drive the EBITDA multiple. Were you guys really conscientious about that, or what did that piece look like?
I mean, we may have thought we were, but like having gone through it now, and like actually been in the trenches of it, I think would probably be some things that you would do differently another time around if you were going to try to build a business for exit. But, I think we're looking at it, and 2018, we start getting a little bit of revenue coming in. We've been trying to hire and build sales teams and kind of not succeeding, right? Not having that product market fit. 2018 product market fit comes into play, and we're like, hey, this has got legs. We build a sales team. At this point, we're building a team and we're scaling it. I think, we were certainly aware growing revenue, and our operating thesis was like a multiple on revenue, not on EBITDA from an exit perspective. But I think the exit was also idealistic in the sense that we were like, hey, we think more is possible, and we've bootstrapped this thing to where it is. Like, how do we enact the vision more as well, right? So I think we were still visionary in that exit. So part of it was like those 2 prongs, right? Like grow revenue, but also be trying to attack the vision that we started with from the beginning, and never losing sight of both of those pieces, I think was absolutely critical. So like, it wasn't just like, hey, grow the business for the point of making the books look good so you can sell it. It was always this balance of like, we got to do right by our customers because we were always playing the long game, right? To like have that run up from 2017, 2018, really was the inflection point was midway through 2018 to 2021, where it was like 600K to 25 million. You have to have the long game in mind that entire period, right? So partly the strategy was like grow revenue, but also take care of the customers, build sophisticated software to support executing this mission at scale. We were like 10 people at the time of sale. And three of those people, myself, Clayton, and Peter, had all been working on it since like 2014. Pretty much that was like the core group of people that had been working on it since back then.
That's incredible. So what does it look like when you go from a business that does $600,000 to 25 million in such a short period of time, and you never have more than 10 people, a few of which were like in Budapest? And all over, you're all in different spots. What's the inside management at that level with not a lot of sheer numbers? You guys must have had incredible organization and working relationships and systems and just making that happen.
I think so. I mean, we read EOS, which is Entrepreneur's Operating System, Traction, Vern Harnish. I'm sorry, Traction. And then we also read Scaling Up, Vern Harnish, Rockefeller Habits, right? Which have these kind of like almost like prescriptive ways of thinking about a business and getting to like a one-page operating, all these kinds of things. So we attempted that multiple times, right? And I mean, sometimes Clay and I will send screenshots to each other of like how we were doing this in 2016. So again, we like this whole time we were trying to build an operating system and a back end in a way that we operate. So we adopted OKRs as like a planning principle, right? And I think the biggest thing that we did was simplify. Like we would take on complexity, but we would just say like, this is our niche within the niche. This is how we're going to serve these customers. Here's how we're going to get better at these things. Here's our like couple, 2-3 goals a quarter. And that was, I mean, it was pretty simplified, like in that sense, right? We just say like, we can't do everything. We're a small team. We have to pick wisely, but whatever we pick, we're going to go all in on. And so there was a lot of discipline in that sense of just like, yeah, don't try to be everything for everyone. Be very clear. Don't try to serve people you can't serve. Stay really, really focused on what you're trying to do. And I've heard the greatest definition I've ever heard of product market fit is if you stop delivering your product, people freak out. And, we had that with like our top customers. Like if our volume went down 5%, we'd get messages, hey, what's going on? Like we need more, not less. And that's the kind of thing that we were able to tap into. And we just kept following that thread, right? My mentor from Civic Solar, Karen Baran, who was the founder that had gone through an exit before, was like, he just said, follow the money. Like, whoever's paying you, listen to them and stay close to them. And we did that. And we built software. We built algorithms, we built all kinds of stuff to try to use technology to solve the problems, right? Because these are big data problems. And we're like buying media on Facebook and Google. So we would say things like, to fight an algorithm, you have to have an algorithm. Like you can't just be in there making decisions. You have to have algorithms. And so we spent a lot of time on developing that. So it was like data, systems, coding, and then like a small sales team, basically. That goes down.
So you've scaled the organization, you're growing, you look at that first attempt to sell, there's lessons learned there. Your family's expanding, but you're making more money. Are you still having fun? And then B, at what point do you then entertain the eventual sale that occurred in 2022?
So the process we've been debating this, should we sell? Should we not sell? Should we grow ourselves more? And actually, Nico was, so along the way, something that I haven't mentioned, makes it sound like we're the ones doing this on our own, but definitely not. In 2018, Nico and I were doing like accountability, and I turned him into my coach. He wanted to become a coach. I said, okay, fine, I'm gonna pay you now and you're gonna become my coach. So get a coach. Then we were hiring like conversion rate coaches, and we had brought this group on, not group on the company, but this group on called the conversion rate experts to help us with that. So we're spending money on like external experts to help us. So we start like getting a lot of momentum with like, hey, you can hire experts. At this point, throw up amounts of money. We're paying the experts and the consultants more than we're paying ourselves in some cases, right? And then in 2019, we brought on a very high level coach as well. And he's helping us to like streamline our operating system and like scale a business. And, he had built a business to $85 million in kind of a direct response vertical, so similar to us. And we're just learning this stuff, soaking it up, right? And we're saying, okay, if we go for a sale, we're starting to get people reach out to us too. Banks reach out to us saying like, hey, if you're thinking about selling, like we'd love to work with you. So we're getting like inbound too, right? Of people saying like, hey, we can help sell your business. And we hit in 2020, or I guess it was the year of 2020, we hit the Inc. 500 number 223. So we're starting to get like a little more, not like celebrity, but we're starting to get a little more inbound from, business.
A lot more attention for sure.
A lot more attention. And if we had kept through, we would have been in like the 100, around 100 if we had kept through to 2022. But once you exit the business, you can no longer be in the rankings. So in 2020, we're debating this. Like, are we going to sell? Are we not going to sell? Are we going to keep going? And we say, you know what? Let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot, go back out to market, but this time we're doing it differently. We're not doing it ourselves. We're running a business now that's not doing 600K. We're running a business doing 15 million, 20 million at that point, right? Run rate accelerating to the 25 million. And we say like, okay, we're going to run an interview process. We're going to we had great consultants on the sales side and bringing in our sales talent and helping us like set up hiring process. So, it's definitely getting to be a well-oiled machine at this point. And we say, we're going to run an interview process on the banks. And so we run an interview process on the banks being like, okay, we need somebody who's been there and done this before because we've seen what that looks like. And Nico made an introduction and we interviewed a bunch of banks and that started the process. The process to sell the company it starts in April of 2021. I'm sorry, 2021, right? We did it in March 20. So the process to sell the business starts, we sign the deal with the bank to represent us in April of 2021. So that process started maybe like 6 months before that. So like sometime in late 2020, we're thinking, okay, maybe we're going to push for this. And I think that, so it's like a year and a half of prep and organization around running the process, right? And during that period,
and just throw a little prop out there. That was Brighthorn Partners out of Denver. So yeah, sure. Good job, Brighthorn.
Brighthorn Partners out of Denver. So that was, just the layers of connection and weaving that got us to that point. And there's a lot of trust you place in a bank or a lawyer like Pat, who represented us, and I'll get to that part, which was awesome. And there's a lot of trust you place there, right? And a lot of responsibility that you take on for yourself to make sure that the people you're hiring you have to always be questioning the people you're hiring. To some extent, right? Because it's still your business, it's still your decision, and you still have to run the business. So just at this point, things are like, now you ask the question of if it's fun. It's definitely fun to be like, all right, family, we're going to Hawaii for a vacation now, and blah, blah, blah. It's not fun when you're like working on your vacation in Hawaii. but it starts to get more fun, a little bit more. And I think Clayton and I were definitely appreciating like, shit, we've been working on this thing for so long. It's great to see the results come in, because that whole time you're wanting the results to happen. For like 4 years, they're not happening. So it does feel great when they start happening, but it's a double-edged bind, because now you got this bigger thing, you got more responsibility. There's like the intensity at that point clicks up, you know what I mean? And intensity clicks up at that point for sure.
So you get to the eventual sale and things are heating up. I'm sure there's a lot of like, if you get a heart monitor on, it's dropping, it's raising, it's dropping, it's raising. You get to the point where the check is cut. And do you have a moment of reflection of just kind of the years past, what led to that, what you went through on the climb? And do you have this moment of just excitement that hits you and takes over?
Maybe. I think there's yes. And there's like, I think I'm starting to get more of the excitement now, a little ways away from it, to be honest, because I think, and Pat can attest to this. The process, like running the process. It's fun at first, and then all of a sudden you're redlining, and Pat again was our attorney in this process, and you're redlining 100-page agreements, reading them over and over, simultaneously like negotiating the last bits of the deal that are like the relational parts of the business with the potential acquirer. You're in the finish line, but everything can still fall apart at that point. You're in the finish line, and you're having doubts about whether or not this is what you want to do. You know what I mean? And there is some, like, in that moment, you're making simple mantras and like matrices of like decision to make, to like push forward. And then a lot of it you don't even understand, right? Like you don't fully understand what's going on. You've never done it before. And there's all these terms. And I think Pat can attest. I mean, we took our business very seriously. We took the legal part of it very seriously. Like we were pretty well organized. But man, we had 3 bouts of like stomach flu in our family, now a 4 leading up to the acquisition. I'm like redlining the agreement like in bed with a banana and some Gatorade. You know what I mean? Like it's not like, so like once it's all said and done, very cute video of like our family celebrating it. I think I sent it for sure, but like, it's mostly at that point maybe relief, but also you're like pretty quickly into the next thing. So there's definitely like a celebration, and there's like a weekend my wife and I took away right after it. But like we're still coming. I mean, honestly, like the truth is we're still trying to make sense of it all.
Well, it's kind of one of those things too. It's like sort of like training for a marathon, and then you run a fast enough time to get into the New York City Marathon, which is awesome and exciting. But then the process of that marathon is grueling, right? Especially public company. It was Enphase Energy, amazing public company. And I think part of the dynamic too is, I know you wrestled with, was you and Clayton went to work for Enphase. And there were some components there. It's like, hey, I'm going from running my own show, building this thing from the ground up, to being absorbed into this multi-billion-dollar company. It's a lifestyle thing, and just your day to day, which was part of what you were wrestling with as well.
No doubt. Yeah, there was a lot of changes there for sure.
So how has that been? I know it's gone well for you. I'm sure there's obviously way more resources. What does the SolarLeadFactory division, now acquired by Enphase, what's life look like for you and the rest of the team now?
Well, I mean, I think that there's no doubt that M&A is a tough process. Being on either part of that, I think, is just always going to be difficult. There's so many things that change so quickly. I think that, Enphase is a great company. It's a remarkable kind of growth and success story in and of its own right. So it's been really fun to learn and watch how they've done that. I think it's, some things are similar, some things are different. We did go from like head of a mouse to the tail of a lion. We, at some point along the way, got a boss as like a general manager of our group, which some level is very hard to stomach. In other ways, it's fantastic because there's a whole layer of complexity of adjusting to a company, and to have somebody who's familiar with that company, who's learning our company as we're learning their company, is actually, I think, a really good way to go. Otherwise, there's all this like politicking and kind of the like unspoken operating ways that like are hard to just grab. So it's been a process. I mean, the business is changing a lot. I think the part that's super exciting about it and that's working pretty well is that we get to go back to some of the visionary kind of idealistic parts of the business, and that we're, now taking our service from this like kind of very focused, very ragtag kind of like pirate ship analogy to a more sophisticated, kind of all-encompassing product that's, again, trying to serve a lot of people. Yeah, it's good to get back to that.
So what's next after this? I mean, it seems like, I'm seeing some points in your life where you're learning, you're adapting, you're launching. Now you sold the company. Now you're back to learning again. You're evolving. Do you think 5 years from now or whatever, you might kind of continue the way of the entrepreneur, and what you're doing today might lead to the next business? Is it still kind of up in the air and to be determined? What's going through your head, and what's your vision for the next 5 years?
It's a great question, and one that I'm pretty fortunate to have the opportunity to like think on, for a while, which is great. So that kind of hard charging, just tough it out, go for it, like make a lot of sacrifices kind of model that got me here. I'm also like stepping back and just looking at some of the challenges that presented on my personal life, in particular with like relationships and friendships and stuff like that. So I'm taking a lot of stock of that as I'm thinking about this next chapter. I'm doubling down on kind of like investing back into myself and learning about what other tools would be available for me in the next chapter. Because again, there was a lot of, like, for lack of a better term, warrior, sword bearing, kind of energy that went into building this company. It was bootstrapped, it was lean, it was super focused, and now getting to kind of look at a wider net. So I think when I look forward to the future, I'm certainly excited to stay in the like kind of in the zone of climate tech, maybe like broadening that to not just solar, but looking at like kind of the broader climate tech energy 2.0 stuff. My kids are 4 and 6, almost 5 and 7. So I'm just kind of hanging a little bit with that energy too of the family at the moment. And, still really looking at like, hey, I think there's a lot of lessons I can learn here at Enphase. But yeah, definitely on the 5-year timeline, looking at how I can, probably be engaged with more early stage companies, but hopefully doing that from a little more balanced kind of perspective.
That's great. This has been an incredible story. It's been a fun story. As Pat mentioned earlier, I was thinking back certainly to what I was doing, around 24 years of age, and it pales in comparison. So it's a heck of a journey. It's a long journey. It's tiring. I'm glad you're kind of at a point where you can reset.
Yeah.
Pat and I both know the strain and stress it can cause with the family dynamic. And so kind of resetting, reprioritizing, not that you weren't, but refocusing on kind of what's important for the family. I mean, I've got 2 young kids myself, and the one thing I always look at is enjoying every day with them, because you blink, they're a different age, they're evolving. Pretty soon they'll be out of the house one day. So I'm glad you're at this point of success, right, from this journey, and I'm excited for what's to come in the future.
Yeah, I mean, amazing story, Scott. You're a great guy, one of my favorite clients to work with, and I think it's awesome that you combined your passion and the way in which you went about it. It wasn't all about the money, but you got into it and doubled down and did something amazing. So kudos to you. And you're still a young man, so
Yes.
I'm sure that we'll be reading and hearing about you at some point in time and something else big. So there's no question about that.
Cool. I think both of you, and I mean, obviously Pat was in the 11th inning with us. Huge appreciation for you in that.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. So as we wrap up the show, BizMafia is what, Scott?
Where business gets made.
Attaboy. Thanks again,
Thanks,
Scott.
Scott.
All right.